Have you ever noticed how there's this conversation that is constantly taking place in your mind? Who are these people that won't stop talking inside all of our heads, and should we be worried or could they be useful? I'm Rania Dube, and welcome to How to Be Less of an Asshole, a channel where self-awareness is the only answer to our problems. This podcast aims to look at human behavior through the lens of history to better understand how we've become the people we are today, with hopes of inspiring you to do the same. Today I'll be talking with my friends Kirstin and Emma about these voices and how best to manage this constant chatter. Kirstin recently sent me this video of a biologist talking about not the exact moment, but he made it sound like there was an exact moment when this inner turmoil started inside human beings. And so it's been maybe 3 weeks now, and a lot of my attention has gone into seeing this inner turmoil within myself. And so what I've noticed, because now I'm really aware of it, is that basically there are two people in my head, and they're always arguing with each other when I'm doing things like driving my car or brushing my teeth. And then some of these moments, let's say for instance, I really want to go buy a pack of cigarettes. That's when these two voices, or whatever they are, they get really intense. So the first thing that I want to ask both of you is, these two me's, who do you think they are? And my second question is, how do I get them to be quiet?
I can definitely speak to that. So reading a book right now called Self-Observation by Red Hawk, and he does a fabulous job of touching on this. There's an entire chapter dedicated to it. And I don't think that there is only two.
That's what I was going to say, more like 17.
Yeah, at least. He calls them the lowercase i's. So I think it depends on the circumstances and the situation that initiates the argument that's happening inside your head, which two of the limitless i's decide to be engaged in the conversation. And whether there's only two that are engaged in the conversation, I'm not sure that it would be limited to only two. I think there might even, in some circumstances, be a third or a fourth one that wants to pop in and have its opinion too. And yeah, so he has an entire chapter that talks about the capital I, or like our higher self. That's the solution, I think, that you're looking for. So as we progress in our evolution and we're able to witness ourselves from the outside a little bit more, then those small i's have less of a grip. So the interference that they want to bring into your peacefulness or your harmony has less of a grip or less of an impact. I don't know if we ever really get rid of them, but I think that the more time we spend in that act of self-observation, which you're doing, Rania, just by like realizing that that's happening and being able to identify when it happens and why it happens and what the kind of listening to that argument going back and forth, it just doesn't carry as much weight. And then we can kind of laugh a little bit and be like, ha ha ha, that's funny that's happening inside my head.
So I thought I was alone that had this thing going on. So at first I wasn't sure if I should say anything. But I don't know if you recall, we were listening to something or talking about something, and they were saying how some people, they can't feel their heartbeat because they're not an internal person. Do you remember what it was that we were listening to?
Yeah, some people have an easier time tapping into the internal sensations because they spend more time actually with their consciousness inside their body. I read about it in an article that was talking about what kind of meditation different people should do, and that some people who find it really easy to stay in their body should do meditation like I think it's called Tritaka, which is where you would keep your eyes open and stare at a candle flame because it's something external. versus some people who have a really hard time being inside of their body and spend more time with their awareness outside of their body, should do meditation on their breath or something like that, where they're learning to spend more time in the body. So yes, very much so. Some people out, some people in.
So do you think that those people have their two me's or their six me's talking inside of them?
I think every single one of us do. I did a program called Landmark Education years and years ago, and they call it Already Always Listening, where we're having we're in conversation with someone else, but we're not actually paying attention to what that person is really doing or saying. We're inside of our head having a conversation with ourselves, deciding how we're going to respond or what we're going to say to them. And that's not like a one person. That Already Always Listening is not one thing, because you can't really have a conversation with only one entity, right? And we're constantly having conversations inside of our head. So there's always at least two sides to that conversation, or at least two small I's happening to that in that conversation.
What's helped me recently is I went to see a counselor, and she was telling me, just in terms of like anxiety, she was like, picture a bookshelf, and the things that you can't control, just put them on the bookshelf and be like, I'm going to get to you eventually. But right now I know that I can't control that. So I'm going to come back to you. And maybe they sit on the bookshelf until you die, and maybe you pick them up and you get to them eventually. But I've been like, I think it's irrelevant in terms of this conversation, because I've been doing that mentally with these voices in my head. I feel like, who am I letting take center stage? And when I talk to my partner and say, like, today, the anxious side of me had all this to say, and just naming it in like a separate self and not like identifying fully with it is really helpful. Like, this crazy part of me felt this way. And then it's like, but it's not truly who I am. It's just those thoughts. That's been helpful.
So when you say it's not truly who I am I the person who just wants to smoke cigarettes, or am I the person that just wants to be healthy?
Neither.
Okay.
You're the one that's watching the conversation happen.
Okay.
You're the one that's able to recognize that it happened and speak of it right now and bring it forth and ask the questions like that. Simply the awareness, simply the part that witnessed it.
And so another part of this is, I'm now aware of how much I'm arguing with myself or my eyes, and it's really making me wonder how I show up in the world. Or like you said, if someone's talking to me, I might be thinking about what I'm going to reply because I'm in my self-absorbed state of thinking. And I'm just wondering, if we're all just talking to ourselves when we go outside, how much does it affect how we're all showing up in the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, because generally when we're participating in the world, we are acting from one of those eyes. And where things get confusing in our relationships and our behavior is that we don't always engage in the same relationship from the same eye. So you might have a friendship with someone where their behavior from day to day isn't consistent. And that's because one day they're behaving from this eye, one day they're behaving from this side, this side, this side, this side, this side, this side, this side. And so you're like, holy, what, those people who we might call flaky? Mm-hmm. Yeah, different eyes are showing up all over the place. And so from someone who's a little bit more grounded and less like variant in their eyes, maybe they only vary between like 3 eyes, that can be super confusing, because you're like, what is happening? Why is this person's behavior so all over the map or so erratic? Because they're switching between these different ways of reacting that are not consistent.
Have you heard of a difference? I haven't looked into this, but in terms of the eyes, is there a male and female difference? Like, I know hormonally, I feel like I have a lot of different eyes based on where I'm at in my cycle. Like, do men have as many eyes, do you think?
I do think that they do.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that they can. I don't
Mm.
know. I don't know that it's necessarily a gender based thing. And maybe there's themes. Like, I think when we look at statistics, monogamy and infidelity, I think that there might be statistics that show it's not necessarily the numbers are not necessarily the same in men as they are in women. I don't know which one would be, I have no idea which one would be higher or lower, but I wouldn't be surprised if one was higher or lower than the other. So there might be themes with gender, but I don't think that one gender has a tendency towards less than the other. I think we're all afflicted.
I'm still thinking about how we show up, because now that you've made me aware that my me is the person watching the eyes, it would be awesome to find a way to just put the eyes on the bookshelf and say, hey, I'm actually going to pay attention to the person talking to me right now, because if we're all going through these different personalities or whatever we want to call them, then that means that when we go out into the world, we're never actually being ourselves.
Yeah. One of the analogies that's been given to me from Eastern philosophy for my teachers in India is the idea of the horse, the cart, and the driver. And so the horses are wild. This is like the mind, the ego, and the cart being the body, and then the driver being the soul. And when there's a disconnect between those three things, then the wild horses basically are running the show, i.e. the mind is running the show, i.e. those little eyes are running the show. But when we just start to develop the relationship between the soul and the body and the mind, then the wild horses are pulled in on the reins. And so the soul, i.e. the witness in you, or the part that's seeing this all happening, then starts to take more control, then starts to tame those wild horses. And as that taming process happenings, that argument inside the mind starts to quiet. And then the way that we engage in the world becomes easier, more harmonious, less upheaval, more compassion, more understanding, more forgiveness. All of those things develop because we are not seeing it from the point of view of the small eyes, but we're seeing it from the point of view of the observer that's not calculating so much or not judging so much.
Do you think the goal is to limit the amount of eyes?
I think the goal is to recognize that they're there. And so I just want to speak to this. I'm so terrible with surprises. It's not my forte. I know that one of us have already spoken about this before, but it's going to be my birthday coming up at the end of the month. And I bought you guys a birthday present. So this is my copy, but I have a copy of this book for both of you too. And it is really incredible how he, like, anybody who's listening to this podcast and finds the topic that we're talking about interesting, you should definitely obtain this book for yourself. It's called Self-Observation, and the author is Red Hawk. It is, aside from Vedic scripture, it is my favorite book of all time. So this chapter 9 is called Multiple Eyes. And it basically, page 63 to page 70 is describing exactly what we're talking about. And he does a very good job of explaining what's happening in our poor little noggins.
Is Red Hawk a native person, or is it a psychologist, or what is the origin of this person?
About the author. He was the Hodder Fellow at Princeton University and currently teaches at the University of Arkansas. He has written other books and poetry. Another book of his that I've read is called Self-Remembering, which kind of goes along with this book.
And what's his solution to becoming aware of the eyes? Because at the end of the day, all we want is to become aware of it.
I'm going to share with you one little bit, if I can find it in here quickly, because I have lots of stuff underlined. So when we think about what we know about quantum physics, he makes reference in here to the when we observe a particle, it behaves differently from when it's not observed. And this is the same as what's happening inside our heads, basically. So when we don't practice meditation, there's no self-observation happening. And those wild horses basically don't have any accountability. They can just do whatever they want. But when we develop a practice of self-observation through meditation, now those wild horses are being watched. So this is what you're describing, Rania, that you've become aware of these conversations, that these arguments that are happening inside your head. And there's a part of you which is now witnessing that. So that simple act of witnessing means that you don't have to do anything. So in quantum physics, they have something I think it's called the double slit experiment. And so they shoot these particles out of particle guns. I don't understand all the details, but the gist of it. And there's these double slits. And when the particles are being observed, the way that they react when they go through these double slits is different from the way that they react when they're not being observed. And so the eyes inside your head, the way that they react when nobody is watching them, they have bad behavior. But when someone starts watching them, their behavior starts to shift naturally. So the simple act of paying attention means that the behavior changes on its own, because the eyes are like, oh, Rania's listening to us. Rania's watching us. We probably should try and get along because our behavior is bad. We know our behavior is bad.
And the same goes for communities, because we don't watch or know each other anymore, and that's why people behave badly. When we were young, if we did something bad and the neighborhood found out about it, my parents also found out about it because everyone knew each other on the street. And the same goes with the internet. With people who are writing a bunch of stuff, it's because they're not being watched or they don't know the people that they're talking to.
Another book that I love that I just actually bought on Audible, and I'm going to listen to it again because I haven't listened to it, haven't read it for years, The Tipping Point. And he talks about the 150. And I think, in different times in human existence, we've lived in smaller communities of around 150 where we're accountable to our community and we're close with our community because it's that small community. But society has become in such a way that we've kind of put ourselves inside these little family compartments, or we've become more recluse from our community. And so that close interaction with our community of 150. So maybe we live in a big city, but we don't really know any of our neighbors or have anything to do with our neighbors. And that removes that aspect of accountability, right? Where we might check in on someone, or we might realize that, someone's being abusive to their partner, and the neighborhood gets together and there's a little bit of an intervention that happens to keep everyone safe. And we don't behave like that as much anymore. And I think that part of that is that that loss of that community of 150-ish. It's just a number that he has observed, where once it gets beyond that number, we lose that.
Do you think our voices are more active because we don't have this anymore? Because I'm just thinking again from a historical point, I always wonder, how did we get here? Like, did we always have these crazy eyes fighting with one another?
Yeah, I was just thinking I was on the same path of like mentally, like, what about the DSM, the diagnostic manual of how they diagnose all the psychiatric disorders? Like, is it all just a push and pull struggle with the eye? And maybe that's an oversimplification, but that's what I was thinking. Like,
No, I don't think it is. I think he talks also in this book, he talks about sanity and insanity, and basically how we are all a level of insane, and that to be sane in this world, it just wouldn't work because you wouldn't fit in. So it's very difficult to be sane in this insane world. I think that what I know, again, I'm going to refer back to my Eastern teachings and my teachers in India, that we go through something called yugas, or stages. Kali Yuga and Dwarpa Yugas. We're like kind of right at the end of Kali Yuga, moving into Dwarpa Yuga right now, which is away from a time of more insanity towards a time of less insanity. And those stages in our human years are quite long. Like I think that they can be up to like 15,000 years. And if you can imagine it like the pendulum swinging. And so inside of those stages, there's times when the human mind is more evolved, or we have the capacity to use a lot more of our brain. And in this Kali Yuga stage, which we're moving out of now, was a time when the human didn't have the capacity to use very much of their brain at all. And because of that, I think that contributes to the insanity that we're living in and the ridiculousness that we've created in our society, which ultimately generates so much sorrow. As the mind is evolving, as the relationship, I don't even want to say the mind is evolving, but as the relationship with the soul and the form is healing, and we're able to operate from more of our actual divine potential, then that pendulum swings more to the place where those eyes are just naturally less active. I don't know if it's something that we really have that much control over it. I think of it as part of the great mystery. Like, we have this creator energy that we come from, which is definitely a great mystery for us trying to understand from the human intellect. And that creator, the mystery of that creator is what makes the cosmos flow as they do. And as the cosmos flow as they do, we go through these almost predetermined cycles, and we're just an aspect of that that's along for the ride. And as much as we can encourage our own learning and growth and evolution, we're still working within these cycles of how the pendulum swings.
So then I should just stop telling the eyes to shut up, because sometimes I swear I just feel like I exhaust myself so much.
So that's a third eye. That part is telling the other two to shut up. That's just a third one.
I didn't even realize. I thought that was me that was observing it all.
And the part of you that's further back, behind more, that's witnessing, that's you.
Oh, yeah, because there is someone witnessing the eye telling me the other two to shut up. I just thought there was two at the time.
Yeah, because if there was no witness, the act of self-observation didn't happen for you to be able to bring it forward here from an objective point of view. So that's that thing that's back here more. This is how I imagine it. I don't know why I do this, but I always think of it as behind me. I think probably because my eyes are in the front of my body. So when I think about me as the witness or the observer, I imagine it back here. Behind everything though, like it's at the very back of the auditorium, watching the whole shit show go on. That's the part that we want to give the attention to. That's the part where we want to sit and be, because that's the part that doesn't have any desire to interfere, doesn't have any desire to get involved, doesn't have any desire to cause any kind of a ruckus or anything. It simply just wants to sit there and witness.
That's a really good point. When I think about that space, that entity, it's like it's really still and it's really quiet. And so you can kind of differentiate the other eyes by comparing it to, like, is this a peaceful thought? Probably not. It might not be the guy in the back or whatever.
Yeah. And so Rania, that's why it was really easy for me to identify that third aspect, because it does want to interfere. It wants to say, stop or shut up or stop arguing or whatever. So that's how it's easy to tell that it's a part of that whole.
Well, it's control. But now that we're coming to an end, I'd like to give one piece of concise advice to help people manage this situation.
I think you did it. I think what we want to do is we want to become aware of that happening, and then don't feel the need to do anything about it. Simply watch. That's all. That's all we really ultimately have to do, is notice that it's there and watch it happening.
And it's a beautiful thing to have this conversation, because I think sometimes you can get so in your head when all the eyes are yappering away. And so you start to feel like truly crazy. Like is this only me and am I crazy? But then you have this conversation with everyone else and everyone else's eyes, and you're like, okay, it's not just me, and I'm okay, you know?
Yeah. And how do I figure out how to step back from that? And so maybe that idea of being at the back of the auditorium is a helpful idea. And then that's my analogy that works for me, is like, step outside of the mind, step outside of the body, go behind it all, and just watch.
Thanks for listening. And if you're to take away anything from this conversation, it's that we all have to deal with the complexity of our minds. But becoming aware that it's happening is the beginning of becoming more present when you go out into the world. We'd like to thank the Pretties for providing the music for the podcast. And until next time, please remember, kindness is contagious.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.